Naruto exclusive videos lemon come out on my Boosty. A 20% discount on the 4th subscription level begins. Hurry up to purchase at a favorable price. You can watch and subscribe. Link in the description. Enjoy watching. Description: it is clear to everyone that Naruto cannot live without adventures. But life after the war turned out in such a way that the famous blonde had to gather dust, gnawing on the granite of science, trampling her way to her dream. Boredom. True, it turned out that adventures also cannot live without Naruto. Take this, sign for it. The quest called Fall on Tobirama's Head begins. And in this set with Tobirama there are also Hashirama and Madara. Now it will definitely not be boring. Chapter 7. Fortunately, she survived. Unfortunately, she had no idea what to do with it. It was unknown what her situation was as a result of the meeting with Yamanaka. After waking up, when she discovered that she was more alive than all the living, Naruto was happy. At first. And then came the understanding that she was alive for the time being. Yamanaka clearly did not see anything good in her head. Despite all her optimism and pathological luck, Naruto doubted that everything would be fine. Maybe at this very moment her present was inexorably changing, because her memories had an effect on the Senju, and they hurried to get rid of Madara in order to avoid a bloody war and release Kagaya. And she was alive, because it was necessary to extract the tailed beast from her, and for this the Uzumaki were definitely required. Naruto could only speculate about her situation, what the Senju did when they learned the truth about the future and about her in general, and what would happen next. She had a lot of free time at her disposal, and no one was bothering her. So gloomy thoughts brightened up the company, worsening its existence. She did not see Madara, Hashirama, or Tobirama, and she really wanted to talk to one of them to find out the answers to the questions that interested her. The unknown was eating her up from the inside. But the worst thing was that her strength was in no hurry to return. Her reserves were stunningly empty. It was also impossible to check on Lise. Thoughts prevented her from relaxing and plunging into a meditative state. All that was left was to suffer from her own gloomy thoughts and to be filled with self-pity, sitting within 4 walls, with her tails between her legs. She might be an Uzumaki. Tobirama threw this Naruto's t-shirt in front of Hashirama and Madara. She didn't let them live in peace. Hashirama only complicated the task, further inflaming his younger brother's paranoia and strengthening his suspicions. Tobirama couldn't sit back and do nothing, knowing that somewhere out there was a potentially dangerous shinobi, warmed up in a friendly manner by his compassionate brother. When he had a free minute, Tobirama once again examined her things. If last time they were looking for a weapon, which she didn't have, now he examined every centimeter of the fabric of her, by the way, very strange clothes. And he found a mon on the sleeve of her t-shirt Uzumaki, a red spiral. Perhaps the strange appearance of her clothes, the seal on her consciousness, and were due to the fact that she was from Uzushio. The only publicly available facts about the ruling branch of Uzushio: they are masters of Fuinjutsu with hair the color of blood. It can't, Madara retorted, looking down at the t-shirt thrown on the table with a disdainful glance. The Senju had conspired? Hashirama was ready to accept this shaky version at face value without proof. Tobirama, however, found proof by indulging his brother. Weak argument, Tobirama agreed. If we recall Madara's words about her wanting to settle here, then the argument is far-fetched. The Uzumaki lived quietly and peacefully as a strong community on their islands. But she could be a bastard, which explains the mon on her clothes, the color of her hair, the seal on her consciousness, and her desire to live in a place where she can quietly disappear among the crowd. Uchiha frowned and turned his gaze to Hashirama. He was immersed in reading papers, ignoring them. Tobirama noticed this too, causing him to grit his teeth. A convenient excuse, Madara dismissed this version. We've come to this. Instead of solving more pressing issues, they argue about some girl who fell on Tobirama's head. Senju Jr.'s red eyes flashed unkindly. Taking a deep breath to calm the anger rising inside him, arguing with Uchiha is a dubious pleasure, leading him to at least quiet irritation. He opened his mouth, but was interrupted. Yes. Hashirama jumped up, almost knocking over a desk covered in documents. The head of the Senju clan was beaming, smiling from ear to ear, and almost dancing on the spot. Madara snatched the magazine from his hands. A piece of paper immediately fell to the floor, which Tobirama quickly picked up. "We have money to build a sewer system." Hashirama immediately snatched the paper from his brother's hands. Madara threw the magazine on the table, as if it was not a magazine, but something disgusting and unworthy to be in his hands. "This is a bad idea," Tobirama said sternly, crossing his arms over his chest. When they were discussing the economic side of the issue, or rather trying to figure out where to get funding for the construction of the village, he definitely didn't mean this. "Good, and most importantly safe," Hashirama exclaimed, hiding the paper in the bosom of his haori. "Betting is not a safe business." "Sometimes it is illegal," Tobirama remarked moralizingly. Everyone forgot about Naruto at once, and Hashirama, in the process, didn't even pay attention, looking for the page with the winners of the bets in the new issue of the magazine from Tanzaku. "Don't grumble." Hashirama turned away from his comrades and began rummaging through the table, diligently looking for something. "Yeah, right there." With a victorious cry, he pulled a scroll out of a small stack and began to shine again. "Tobirama, you're in charge, and Madara and I are going on a mission to Tanzaku," Senju said enthusiastically, swelling with joy, grabbing his friend by the arm and leading him out of the office. Tobirama sighed heavily. He understood that the mission, an excuse to take the winnings. True, a very large and significant one. Hashirama could have handled it alone, or sent someone else. The sane Madara in proud solitude, but no, he decided to go himself. At least he had enough brains to take Uchiha. Tanzaku is exactly the place from which Hashirama should be kept away. Madara, to the delight of the younger Senju, also understood this, and could become an impressive brake on the hyperactive brother, who had a pathological craving for gambling. "Keep an eye on her," Uchiha said coldly, resigned to his not very happy fate. He did not know what was better, to babysit a potential spy, or to restrain the gambling Hashirama in a paradise for players like him. Boredom, a real punishment for Naruto. Sitting within four walls was stifling, and the frightening prospects, lovingly invented by the inflamed fantasy of the Jinchuriki, prevented her from taking a step beyond the threshold of the house. Those who came to her to bring food, water, a change of clothes, were scared of her when she pounced on them with questions. Having concluded that people visiting her were ordered to remain silent, she again sank into melancholy. There was also the possibility that everyone already knew that she was the Jinchuriki of the nine-tailed fox. So they are afraid, look away and remain silent. No, they did not know that she was a vessel for the Biju. If they had known, they would have looked different. Naruto remembered very well what a look full of fear and disgust looked like. Most likely, people were afraid of her persistence. On this account, one could calm down for now. Information about her being the Jinchuriki of the tailed demon had not leaked to the masses, but that didn't change the fact that everything here was driving her crazy. So crazy that she wanted to tear her hair out. When she finally got sick of the four walls, and was filled with boundless sympathy for her Bijou, who was destined to sit in a cage, she tried to stick her nose outside. Her nose remained intact. Emboldened, she walked around the garden, stretching her bones and airing her head a little. It became a little easier. The next day, she almost never left the street. Having found a training ground on the territory of Madara's home, she distracted herself with physical exercises until exhaustion. She saved her chakra. She didn't want to waste the minimum that splashed in her. She reminded herself of Rock Lee, who set unthinkable goals for himself and achieved them. Naruto managed to do hundreds of push-ups in one day. Run dozens of laps. Practice and come up with new combinations for hand-to-hand combat with a wooden makiwara, smashing it to pieces. And bring yourself to the state of jelly. Her muscles were shaking from the tension, as if they had turned into a gelatin dessert. But in addition to the tension, she was also sweating profusely. There were splinters, twigs and leaves stuck in her hair, and she was covered in dust that she had kicked up while running on the sandy training ground. There had been a significant minus in the past, the absence of human comforts. Electricity had not yet been installed, nor had sewerage. She already dreamed of a shower. Washing herself with water from a basin was still a pleasure. If it was almost easy to wash away the consequences of her unsuccessful escape, then washing away the consequences of training with a basin, mission impossible. This will require more than one basin. And not 10. But many more. She is a shinobi, knows from her own experience what discomfort and hardship are, and calmly endures all these inconveniences. Fortitude enduring sleeping in the open air, washing in the river, often in icy water, the toilet in the nearest bushes, but she is not on a mission. Wiping the sweat from her face with a dirty sleeve, she looked tiredly at the wall, behind which the forest spread out. She knows approximately where the river flows. A basin of water will not do. It is dirty and stinking, like a pile of garbage in a dump. Naruto lost count of how many days she was here, but still no one was guarding her. If they were watching her, then in such a way that she did not see or hear. For a couple of days now she has been sleeping only in that damned house, and the rest of the time she spends outside. Food, water, and a change of clothes continued to be brought, leaving her to wait for her, and no one raised a panic that the captive had escaped. Sticky sweat, dusty hair, and dirt on her skin still pushed her to commit a crime. Quickly running to the accommodation allocated to her, she took a piece of soap, a towel, and clean clothes and returned back. Naruto jumped over the fence, heading off to find the river. It seemed much easier than finding the bathhouse complex in the Uchiha quarter. However, it was most likely a weak excuse. Outside the walls of the Uchiha quarter, she felt a little free. In the bathhouses, people would stare at her, some with curiosity, some with suspicion. Blonde in the Uchiha abode like a white crow among black ones. And washing yourself when people are staring at you is not very pleasant. Tobirama made the seals. Nothing worked. The illusory clone remained an illusory clone. Attempts to modernize the technique failed time after time, harshly pointing out his error in calculations. With his nose buried in the scroll, he looked for his miscalculation. Fresh air, the murmur of water, the singing of birds and the chirping of cicadas were almost a miracle for him. After 4 walls, the smell of paper and dust. Hashirama's absence almost nailed him to death in the office where all important issues were temporarily resolved, papers were stored and citizens were received. Only due to his hard-working nature he was still alive and full of energy, and after solving the pressing problems of the village under construction, he still had the strength and desire to work on his own projects. It was a hobby that allowed him to relax, despite the fact that the process of creating new jutsu took a lot of energy. The mind-bending thoughts and complex schemes required more attention and concentration than construction estimates and conflict resolution. And they often led to migraines, but they were undoubtedly enjoyable. Especially when the end result was in sight. He folded the seals again, trying to change the sequence of symbols and the ratio of chakra. His clone appeared in front of him, which succumbed to the ripples. Tobirama cursed, dispelling the jutsu. He walked in circles. It was annoying at times. Once he managed to make a clone that cast a shadow, which meant it was tangible. But the technique dissipated after less than half a minute. Based on that more or less successful result, he looked for a solution, but only drove himself further into a dead end. Frowning, he again stared at the first and only positive result of an attempt to modernize ordinary copying. The success was that he changed the combination of the symbol bundle, but something else influenced the result, because at the moment this bundle did not work. And only he came to a certain conclusion, what could influence a relatively positive result, as he was distracted by a loud splash of water, and then a familiar chakra hit his consciousness. Carried away by the creation of a jutsu, he did not notice how he was not alone here. A blonde sweetheart was swimming in the river, who became a real thorn in his life. Only the light crown of her head and bare shoulders stuck out of the water. Naruto was swimming, without a twinge of conscience, leaving the Uchiha quarter. Tobirama tensed up, but then, considering that she was not doing anything illegal, he relaxed. After the head of the Yamanaka clan picked her brains, she sat quieter than a mouse, making no attempt to escape and not showing a bit of aggression. Perhaps the fact that she was acting quietly and unnoticed should be alarming, but Senju decided to let the situation go for himself and not dwell on the possibility that this lady could be a first-class assassin and spy. With each passing day, this theory became more and more ridiculous. As a censor, he did not feel the potential in her that Hashirama assured them about. He almost did not feel any chakra in her. It was weak, contrary to his brother's statement. And it did not look like she was deliberately hiding its volumes, like any other self-respecting shinobi. She was nervous, looked like a trapped animal, and was constantly tense, barely holding herself in check, and in such a state, hiding the reserve of chakra is useless. Sometimes her energy got out of control, but these were minor outbreaks. So minor that he barely felt them. Still, emotions in the shinobi craft evil. Once again burying his nose in his scroll, he immersed himself in his work, distancing himself from the splash of water and the barely noticeable presence of a stranger. Uzumaki rolled her eyes in bliss as she dipped into the cool water. Everything inside her was shaking with pleasure. She had no idea that bathing in a river could be so enjoyable. Apparently it could. The muscles were no longer buzzing so much from the tension, calmed by the coolness of the river water. It seems that she will soon rethink some things. For example, swimming in the river after training, not a necessity, but a blessing. Especially when it can be done freely, without thinking about the fact that a kunai can fly into your back at any moment. She still couldn't relax completely. The probability of an attack is high. Times are turbulent, bandits are roaming the forest, and in the village there are those who consider her a threat. Still, it's better not to relax and finish things quickly. Having soaped her hair and body, and having spent almost the entire bar of soap on this matter, Naruto dived. And when she emerged, she noticed that she was not alone here. It's just that this fact did not immediately catch her eye. Although the fact did not try to hide, apparently. Naruto picked out with her gaze from the abundance of greenery around the gray crown of the head, belonging to Tobirama. And this was definitely that ill-fated albino. How fragile was the feeling of relaxation and bliss. It crumbled into sand. As soon as she saw Tobirama, she was again overcome with tension mixed with anger. All this time, she diligently soaped her body almost in front of Tobirama's nose. Her cheeks instantly flared up from the incoming heat of either shame or anger. Indignation grew in her chest with the beating of her heart. Having plunged into the water up to her nose, Naruto peered at the frozen figure of the future second, wishing that he would evaporate in an instant. Although she understood with her head that everything that could be seen, he had clearly already seen, and she had absolutely nothing to hide. As well as embarrassment. Such is the lot of a shinobi, to be embarrassed and hide your body. A useless thing, especially in the field. But she was not in the field. And in those years, it seemed, the ethics were somewhat different. Kunoichi were rare. A woman here primarily existed for the hearth and the birth of children, and not for war and bloody missions. Senju did not evaporate, and Uzumaki began to feel the cold. Spring reigned outside, and the evenings were not particularly warm, especially for a long swim. The muscles, strained by grueling training, began to cramp, and the lips began to turn blue and shake from the cold. No matter how much she drilled him with an angry and displeased look, he did not move. Squinting, she saw that he did not even look in her direction. The second sat hunched over, staring somewhere at his knees. He looked as if he was carefully reading something. Naruto Uzumaki, taking water procedures on the riverbank, did not bother him in principle. Feeling out of place, she nevertheless came out of the water, throwing her long hair over her shoulders, hiding her chest behind damp curls and not taking her eyes off Tobirama. If he raised his head, tearing himself away from his rather fascinating reading, and began to watch her, she would blame him. When she found herself on the shore, the man was looking away, folding seals. Naruto froze tensely, thinking that he was a rare bastard. To attack when she was so vulnerable. There was no attack. Tobirama again looked somewhere, ignoring her existence. But he knew for sure that she was here. The last time they clashed in the forest, nothing good had happened to her. Uzumaki sighed with relief, picked up a towel from the grass and immediately wrapped herself in it, continuing to watch Tobirama. He could do it. He is a master at throwing kunai into the back. Having quickly dried her body with a linen towel and blotted her hair with it, she dressed as quickly as possible in the hated blue Uchiha Haori. Picking up her dirty clothes from the ground and throwing them over her elbow, she walked with a firm step towards Senju. No matter how nervous he was, it wouldn't hurt to find out the state of affairs. And he could clearly be well informed. The second one folded the seals again. Naruto froze halfway, ready to attack him in response. She should have enough chakra for at least a tiny Rasengan. There was no attack. Naruto looked around and saw that Tobirama had created a clone. The clone immediately dissolved. Naruto looked at Tobirama in bewilderment, who looked blacker than a cloud. Only lightning was not flashing above him. Something was tensing and angering him. Uzumaki, having caught her breath and realizing that he was not spying on her, but was clearly not going to attack, moved towards him again. He did not notice her, or pretended not to see. Naruto came as close to him as possible, catching a glimpse of a scroll with some blueprints. Vaguely familiar schemes. At first, she wanted to reproach him, although this was clearly a bad reason to start a more or less peaceful conversation in an attempt to find out the information she was interested in. But it would definitely attract his attention. But the words got stuck in her throat when he, still not paying attention to her, folded the painfully familiar clone seals. She again glanced at the scroll resting on his lap. Tobirama Senju was developing the shadow clone technique. He was developing it unsuccessfully. He couldn't come to the final result, which is why he looked so tense and upset? Yes. Upset. It was as if he was hitting a blank, unbreakable wall, trying to break through an insurmountable barrier with his head. A historical moment. Naruto's heart jumped in his chest from this realization. History was being made before her eyes. A jutsu was being created that would become her signature and beloved one. It was breathtaking. Blue eyes lit up with awe. The times of the founders shook the mind with the same emotions that the same shinobi gods evoked, albeit at first. Or moments like these, when she accidentally witnessed the creation of an amazing jutsu. Exclude from the knitting of the seal the sheep and the snake, Uzumaki blurted out before thinking, looking reverently at Tobirama's notes. Her eyes continued to shine and sparkle. Only now did she remember that Tobirama Senju is a genius. He created so many wonderful, mind-boggling jutsu. True, some of them are forbidden. Even Shadow Clone could end in the death of the one who used it. And Edo Tensei brought many misfortunes in her life. But the vast majority simple, clear, and most importantly, effective. In front of her is a genius in the flesh. Tobirama only now paid attention to her, looking at her with such a heavy gaze that the heart that was happily fluttering in her chest immediately froze. Naruto fell from heaven to earth, crushed by cruel reality. A genius who beats defenseless girls. A bastard. Naruto stirred. Again a wave of indignation rose in her, swallowing everything, including reason. Now she will prove to him that by excluding these seals, he will achieve the necessary result. She is right. In a momentary impulse, throwing her things to the ground, she was going to show how simple the solution is, and she is worth listening to, and not looking at as an empty space. Naruto stubbornly pursed her lips, was going to demonstrate her rightness, and her fingers almost folded into the symbol of a tiger, but something clicked inside. Damn you, Naruto growled under her breath, lowering her hands and becoming embarrassed. It seemed like a very bad idea to interfere with the course of the past. Senju should come up with the jutsu himself. Without her interference. What conclusion have you come to about me? After taking a short pause to calm her excitement, Uzumaki asked what had been bothering her so much all these days. You don't inspire confidence, he said briefly, looking down at the calculations again. He was hinting with his whole appearance that he didn't want her company. And he was also worried that she had tried to interfere with the creation of the jutsu, expressing her assumptions. Which, in his opinion, weren't worth paying attention to. It was unlikely that this woman knew anything about creating jutsu. This is all clear anyway, she said discontentedly, having received an answer that was not what she wanted. She was worried about something completely different. What did Yamanaka see? Uzumaki said in a demanding tone, looming over Tobirama like a menacing shadow. Okay, trying to look menacing. Tobirama looked up at her, looking at her as if she were dust beneath his feet, even though he was looking up at her. Naruto winced at the feeling. Was there anything interesting there? Tobirama answered with a question. She was starting to irritate with her persistence and presence. Let's say, state secrets of another country, Uzumaki blurted out at random, not giving up her position. Her fist itched to punch that cold, impenetrable face. Well, she's allergic to people like him. What did Yamanaka see? She repeated her question, with much greater emphasis. Patience was about to burst. Provocations must be above his dignity. Nothing, Tobirama answered truthfully, holding her unreadable gaze, after which he again buried himself in his calculations. He remembered about state secrets. Probably, she really was from Uzushio, and the secrets of this state were hidden in her head behind 7 locks. Naruto boiled over. Was he mocking her? Falling to her knees in front of him, she grabbed him, again attracting all his attention to herself. Senju narrowed his eyes dangerously, and with recognition in his crimson gaze he looked at her palms, squeezing the fabric of his clothes. Stop mocking, tell the truth already. What? Did you see Yamanaka? Pulling him towards her, Naruto said through clenched teeth. She didn't care that he was objectively stronger than her, and represented a direct danger to her. But she had already exhausted herself so much that she was ready to get an answer in any way, even such a risky and stupid one. A moment, and he twisted her wrists, forcing her to release the edges of his haori from his tenacious grip. Does this girl even have any sense? The blue eyes opposite sparkled with anger, not a drop of fear in front of him. And her stubbornly upturned chin, she didn't flinch under his attack. She didn't even bat an eyelid when he squeezed her fragile wrists with force, barely holding her back from wanting to break them, and her hands were very thin and bony. It must have hurt her. Nothing, he repeated, pushing the impudent girl away from him until he hit her head against a tree again, because she was annoying him too much with her behavior. Naruto choked with indignation. He was making fun of her. Pressing her hands throbbing with pain to herself, she jumped to her feet. There would be no constructive dialogue with him. Yamanaka clearly saw something, and this bastard was silent, mocking her so that she would completely eat herself up morally. This is such a terrible tactic, moral pressure. How he infuriates her. Even if he was the second Hokage 3 times over, a genius in creating jutsu and the strongest in the history of shinobi, she now hates him. Asshole. And once again an asshole. And you need more chakra. Don't control the flow, the technique will take as much as it needs, she spat out maliciously, and picking up a dirty haori and a wet towel from the ground, headed towards the Uchiha quarter, cursing Tobirama with all her might. Tobirama tore himself away from contemplating his developments to accompany the furious girl with his gaze until she disappeared behind the trees completely. But he had decided to be completely honest with her, and it was not his fault that she did not believe his words and was angry with him. He deserved such an attitude from her, just as she deserved rudeness from him in return. Taking a deep breath, he again plunged headlong into his developments, completely forgetting about the meeting with the mysterious Naruto. Changing the combinations of seals and the proportions of chakra poured into the jutsu, he spent a lot of time on useless attempts. And when the sky had already turned blue-black, and the night was in full swing outside, he decided to resort to this girl's advice. Why wasn't he joking? Trying is not torture. The torture was that no matter how he picked combinations and dosed chakra, everything was wrong. Almost what he wanted, but still not it. The clone remained on the verge of genjutsu, or took on a physical shell, but was crooked, awkward, and a moment later collapsed. Tobirama folded the tiger seal, releasing control over the chakra, just as that Naruto had told him. A quiet clap, and next to him stands another clone. His copy opposite looked at the original with a studying gaze and froze expectantly. Senju held his breath, peering closely at the clone. It cast a shadow barely visible in the moonlit night. Picking up a pebble from the ground, he accurately threw it at the forehead of the copy. The copy immediately, using pure reflexes, shielded itself from this small attack. The stone, hitting the wrist, fell at the feet of its twin. It worked! He did it! All he had to do was throw aside the seals that were mainly used in techniques for creating genjutsu. There! He's an idiot. He should have immediately figured out that these symbols were what prevented the clone from being made material. Eliminate the part responsible for genjutsu. Everything is so obvious. And not dose the chakra, as required to create an illusory clone. His sensors felt a fairly large reserve of energy in the copy. So the copy was a very capable combat unit, feeding off his chakra reserves. Outrageously banal. Shadow Clone Jutsu, Tobirama, overjoyed, hastened to give the name that the clone's ability to cast a shadow had inspired him to. The copy grunted approvingly. Writing down the algorithm of actions in the scroll, Senju allowed himself to smile. The technique had been created, all that was left was to study it thoroughly, which he would do tomorrow. Or tonight. Because it was clearly past midnight. But his joy was immediately overshadowed by the fact that it had been that same impudent girl who had suggested it to him. He had succeeded only on the tip of that Naruto. She had taken just a fleeting glance at his notes, and solved the puzzle in a few miserable seconds. The pencil in his hand cracked. Naruto had dealt another blow to his dignity without even realizing it. Or else, woman, Tobirama muttered, dispelling the jutsu. This witch, knowing her weakness, played on another, manipulating his feelings and hurting his honor. Now, in addition to the guilt he felt because he heartlessly smashed a defenseless and currently weak woman's head against a tree, something akin to the hatred he felt for Madara was added. Just as burning and all-consuming, and partly unfounded. Only Madara could get him mad before without much effort. Now another person was added to this list. And to his shame, it was a woman. Chapter 8. His look said, "You're stupid." Kyubi made his opinion on Naruto's actions clear and distinct, and he didn't share her joy at all. And his Jinchuriki's actions were as follows: she made it clear to Tobirama how to concoct the shadow clone technique, wiping his nose. Under his gaze, the cheerful Naruto became sad and ashamed. Naruto. All the jubilation vanished as if by magic. Or rather, it was swept away by its tails and burned by its red eyes. And belatedly, as usually happens with her, came the understanding that she had screwed up. And twice. The first, she brazenly influenced the past by telling Tobirama how to properly perform shadow cloning. The second, he is the only one who can help her get out of here. Tobirama is the most brilliant shinobi, who created a lot of cool techniques. It turns out that just a couple of days ago, Naruto herself worsened her chances of returning to her time. Now, if it had occurred to her earlier that becoming enemies with Senju Jr. was not the best option, then she would have behaved much more restrained. Perhaps she would have bitten off her tongue so as not to blurt out something unnecessary, either then, nor now, nor ever again. Agree, this is a small sacrifice in order to return home. And home, where everything is as before. And now, where is the guarantee that everything is as before at home? Something told her that changing the past is not the best option for her future. I wonder where her intuition and common sense were when she decided to pour chakra into that scroll that resonated suspiciously strangely with her chakra and almost called for her to activate the seal on it right now. Okay, that's not the point now. Something had to be done about the current situation. And under Kurama's stern gaze, surprisingly humiliating and completely out of place with the small and insanely cute fox, Naruto left her subconscious. Hung her head and went out into the garden. The four walls of her refuge weighed too heavily on her subconscious. She felt sad because of her own short-sightedness. And she also wanted to become Hokage. Such a Hokage would be laughed at in his first week of rule. Or worse. They would impale him for terrible rule. The desire to rule and lead Konoha on a straight course to prosperity is not enough. Brains are needed here. And reality shows her in different ways how immature she is, and also impulsive. And outrageously stupid. So she gets slapped by the universe for her misdeeds. What to do now? What to do? After all, Tobirama, this is a real option for a quick return to her native times. She should have guessed about this much earlier. Only his open hostility irritated and angered her. Well, okay, if she hadn't humiliated his dignity with enviable consistency, he still wouldn't have helped her. He clearly wouldn't have believed that she was from the future. He would have twirled his temple and thrown her behind bars, because the potential spy's lie was too fantastic. Or schizophrenics. They are also dangerous types, they need to be isolated from society. Senju Jr. has problems with trust. And the same ones as Uchiha with hatred. And if she managed to hide the fact that she appeared from the future, why on earth would Tobirama help her? He has Konoha, for example, being rebuilt. He has a lot of his own things to do, and he won't solve her problems. Even higher powers are powerless here. Tobirama, a heart of stone. A rock-solid man. No amount of persuasion will soften him up. Especially with her current state of affairs. All she can do is be sad. And figure out how to get out of here without help. And look, while she's trying to figure out a way out, she'll grow so old that she'll live to see her future, if she's lucky. Shinobi don't live that long, but maybe Jinchuriki can boast of their longevity? Naruto sat down on a bench under a cherry tree near a small pond where brightly colored carp were splashing, and became completely sad. Her life was a disaster. No matter how you look at it, an ambush. It's also not clear, do they still consider her a spy? The executioner hasn't come for her soul yet. Maybe because Madara is on a mission? He would slit her throat without a twinge of conscience. For him, killing is easier than blinking an eye. Her position is precarious. Wherever you look. Perhaps she would sit here in her pants, under the sakura, mindlessly watching the koi winding circles in the pond, but an itch in one place began to itch and buzz. And a brilliant idea came to mind. Jumping up from her place, she rushed towards the residence, this time finding the exit from the Uchiha quarter without any problems. Only the dark-haired clansman passing by had time to turn around to look at her. Madara. What can you do? She is like a white crow among black ones, she certainly attracts a lot of attention to her person. I'm sorry, she found him in the Hokage's residence. Tobirama was sorting through documents, sitting on a mat. Almost the entire floor was strewn with different colored scrolls. But the table was littered with plans and construction drawings. Paper chaos. Seeing it, this hellish document chaos, the thought flashed through her head that it was not particularly worth rushing to become Hokage. Doubting her idea for a moment, she hesitated for a couple of seconds on the threshold of the office. And then, taking a deep breath and some courage at the same time, she began to move from one island of the floor free of documents to another. Bending over the future second, who was intently studying the documents, she blocked out the sunlight. Cherry blossom petals fell from her hair, stuck in the curls, while she indulged in despondency in Madara's garden under the shade of a cherry tree. Naruto innocently blinked her eyelashes, as if it wasn't she who was the cause of this obscenity that was showered on the documents. And she froze in anticipation of the inevitable stern reprimand addressed to her. Tobirama did not tear his gaze away from the scroll, continuing to delve into the essence of what was written, casually brushing away the petals and the whole flower that were chaotically scattered on the paper. He was not embarrassed by the fact that the documents were being shadowed by the uninvited guest. "I'm sorry," Naruto repeated, this time forcing himself to bow respectfully at a perfect right angle. There was not a drop of regret in her voice, though. Well, she had honestly tried. Her whole genius plan was to apologize and start mending fences with Tobirama. She really couldn't figure out how to get back on her own. And someone like that, an ace at creating Jutsu, could definitely help her. At least indirectly. Maybe he'd give her the right idea. For what? Yet Senju raised his gaze to her, full of Arctic ice and unkillable skepticism. What do you mean, for what? Naruto straightened up, taken aback by his question. She was shrinking down here, and he didn't understand why. Naruto clenched her fists, trying to suppress the sudden wave of anger. I'm ruining your self-esteem, Uzumaki did not finish. She was embarrassed by the gaze of the future second. It seemed that he had already mentally quartered her 10 times with particular cruelty. Look at his sharp, piercing gaze, and his aura was terribly deadly. Naruto slapped herself on the forehead. There you go! She reminded the man how his self-esteem had been humiliatingly flaunted by some little girl. I'm sorry, she said pitifully, her eyes looking down at the floor in shame. Sincerely now. Yes, she should bite her tongue off, so as not to blab too much. How did you know that you don't have to hold back your chakra when cloning? Tobirama put the scroll aside and turned all his attention to the uninvited guest. Her brightness made his eyes dazzle. Against the backdrop of the somewhat gloomy, not yet fully furnished office and the beige scrolls, she was an outrageously bright spot. Naruto's eyes widened at him in fear. What should she tell him? She's not a genius at this. How does she do everything? Even in creating techniques? Purely intuitively. Tobirama looked at her expectantly, almost dissecting her with his gaze, like some kind of frog, taking her apart into components. And just a little more, he'll find a catch. He'll understand that she doesn't understand. Well, what's it called? Uzumaki mumbled, nervously rubbing her neck, becoming covered in red spots from excitement. In short, for an illusory clone you need very little. A drop of concentrated chakra. Well, we pour it into it in measured doses. It doesn't require more. That's why it's illusory. Intangible. Naruto knew how to talk nonsense and charm the enemy's teeth like no one else. And now, she tried to charm Tobirama. And you, as I understand it, tried to make a normal clone. Well, one that has a physical body. And for the scale of such a technique, the dose chakra is not enough. And if the reserve is small, it will not work. This is a technique of a different rank. Tobirama, crossing his arms, listened to her attentively. And then suddenly, on the last word, he jumped up, and grabbing his notes, began to actively write something. Naruto just stood stupidly blinking her eyelashes, not understanding anything. Can we already say that she got off with a slight fright? Rank. Great idea. I'll suggest Hashirama introduce a technique ranking system, he explained, seeing the sweep Naruto, frightened by his zeal. Then we need to introduce the ninja rank so that there is an understanding of what rank of shinobi can learn this or that technique, Naruto said automatically. In general, shadow cloning was a forbidden technique. And she, a genin, had mastered it. Well, due to her chakra reserves. Although it is a useless system, well, in terms of studying techniques, here you need to start from the chakra reserve and skills, she corrected herself, looking closely at Tobirama. And again she was overcome with awe. Her beloved Konoha was being rebuilt, the village was just being formed, like all systems. And she saw it with her own eyes. It makes sense, Tobirama seemed to have caught a wave. The shinobi skill rank will still be necessary. In order to properly distribute missions, which also need to be divided into categories to reduce the death statistics, Tobirama's eyes were ablaze with a million ideas swarming in his brain. Although he still looked stern, with a frightening energy, he had transformed beyond recognition. Naruto was ready to take back her words about the second being an asshole. Just a little more, and her respect for the future Hokage would grow into blind adoration. There were times when she idolized each of the rulers of the leaf. And the volume of chakra and the ability to handle it should not be the main criterion for dividing into ranks. Strategy, tactics? Uzumaki remembered Shikamaru, who was appointed Chunin, although he failed the exam. And the explanation for this appointment was ridiculously simple: Nara's flexible and plastic mind. The ability to correctly assess the situation in order to minimize losses. Naruto herself lit up from within, catching the wave. What an infectious energy Tobirama has. Kami-sama, history is being made here. Oh my, it seems like her head is spinning from euphoria. Exam. We'll have to introduce an exam to rank everyone, Tobirama's hand could barely keep up with his thoughts. His handwriting left much to be desired. But this had to be written down. So many ideas. So many thoughts. Yes, yes, yes. Naruto nodded vigorously. And Tobirama can be tolerable, interesting, and Kami-sama, delightful. Well, that's a real example to follow. And then, some stronghold of prudence, breaking through the hurricane of her emotions, hit her on the head and reminded her that she was climbing where she wasn't wanted. With this understanding, the idol burst like a soap bubble, ceasing to please the eyes and soul with its shaky form and palette of colors. And here she is again, floridly, but she influenced the course of events. And it was with her help that Tobirama clung to these ranks. And no, she is not arrogant. And she still stands here, mouth open, throwing him ideas. The idea of ripping out her tongue was becoming more and more attractive and necessary. Here you go, Uzumaki cursed, having seen the light. Tobirama was still going on, but his words had become empty sounds for her. She covered her mouth in fear, and backing away, ran out of the office before she blurted out anything else unnecessary, leaving a couple of sandal prints on the documents. Again she rushed headlong to her temporary shelter. The residents of the Uchiha quarters still looked at her with bewilderment, because she stood out like a motley spot against a background of boring, pale-faced and dark-haired clansmen. Madara. And her incomprehensible behavior caused confusion and some concerns among people. Hey Tobirama. Hashirama slapped his brother on the back in greeting, thus attracting his attention. The younger one paced the office with long strides, scattering scrolls, narrating something at the top of his voice under his breath and scribbling in a notebook. How are you? The elder put 2 bottles of sake, dragged from the bosom of his Tanzaku armor, on the table with a loud clang. So to speak, a souvenir, though not for a long memory. Tobirama's gaze brightened. He looked around the office. But apart from him and his brother, there was no one here. Naruto had disappeared without a trace. But when? Somehow he had missed the fact that she had left. He was absorbed in thinking out loud, the starting point of which was this very Naruto. Gracious Rikudo. This woman inspired him and supported his thoughts. But most importantly, she enthusiastically thought along with him, said logical and correct things. Either she is a cunning fox who is trying to gain trust with her apologies and unexpected support in her thoughts, or she is a truly smart kunoichi whose soul aches for Hashirama's project. Amazing, Tobirama reported, slightly embarrassed. You call this wonderful? Hashirama waved his hand at the chaos of papers and drawings. All his cheerfulness had blown away. He had to continue to clear away the rubble. What did you expect, brother? There's no escape from bureaucracy. Senju Jr. looked at his notes again. About bureaucracy. We need to discuss something. Maybe another time? I came here from a mission, Hashirama finished, anticipating long and tedious discussions of something important, but clearly not very urgent. Oh, in vain, he immediately went visit Brother. Your mission was not according to your status. 2 powerful shinobi went to Tanzaku for money. A waste of resources? Tobirama decided to get straight to the point. True, he started from afar. Therefore, I propose introducing ranks for shinobi and missions. This will increase productivity and reduce mortality statistics. Hashirama reached for the sake and uncorked it, immediately taking a swig. It seemed like Tobirama was right, but Hashirama sensed with his mokuton that this would drag on. And he needed to wash down his grief. Now Hashirama would be barred from leaving the village forever. This is exactly what the younger man's ideas smell of. He could bury himself in paperwork right now, somehow hiding from the coming responsibility. Look how many papers he had to sort through had piled up. And Madara helped occasionally. He had his own responsibilities. Just like Tobirama. Every shinobi in the village will have to pass the test. And Hashirama, having become completely embarrassed, began to listen to his younger brother's brilliant ideas that will help them organize the work of the ninja, washing it down with rice wine. Chapter 9. Naruto sat within 4 walls without leaving. To bite off her tongue or somehow remove it, a stupid idea. and completely inhumane. Well, Naruto, after all, loves himself and takes care of himself. Therefore, after several hours of self-flagellation, it was decided not to leave her living space for the sake of the future of Konoha and her present. Well, it was worth taking care of herself. When she returned, she ran into Madara. The gods saved her from that very physical collision. Otherwise, her intuition sensed that if she had crashed into his stately and enormous figure at full speed, he would have perceived it as an attack. And he would have committed seppuku on her with that very shiny and sharp scythe. She understood all this from his eloquent and very expressive look, reddening from behind his black hair. Well, what can you do? She has a talent for understanding the Uchiha by his look. And his miasma of mistrust just pierced her entire insides. He was the one who was very negatively disposed towards her person. The Uchiha's mistrust was much worse than Tobirama's. And it must be admitted, 100 times worse. Tobirama might think for a few seconds before cutting her, but Madara. He wouldn't blink an eye and would free her soul from the shell of her mortal body, thereby solving all her problems. And Naruto loves his problems, as well as his mortal body. But his problems are bigger, because he doesn't spare his body, giving himself over to them, to his problems, with all his guts. That's why Naruto became a recluse. But it didn't last long. Like everything else, her reclusion came to an end. In the person of Madara. So who are you? Madara appeared in the middle of the room with a whirlwind of green leaves. Naruto shuddered in surprise, carefully opening her right eye. Madara interrupted her meditation. The bastard didn't let her go down into her subconscious and check how well the chakra was recovering. And the chakra was recovering catastrophically slowly. And Kurama had grown by only about 10 centimeters. Naruto decided for herself that it was somehow connected with the seal. And perhaps, in order to support her presence here, it was still sucking energy out of her. Well, she had never had her reserves recover so slowly, and now it was already a lot of time. Naruto. Free mercenary, I want to settle down here, opening her second eye, Naruto said. Are you from Uzumaki? Madara narrows his eyes dangerously. And it seems that he is blushing. Probably trying to count the slightest emotions. And Naruto fails to hide his tension, which is holding her every muscle. What made you decide? It seems that there is no point in denying it. So we need to at least find out why he decided so. Or they. Barrier. Who put it up for you? And Madara touched his head with his index finger. Naruto looked back at him in confusion. The head of the Yamanaka clan came across a barrier in your head, said that it looks like the work of Uzumaki, and then, praise be to all the gods, Uchiha gave an explanation. And he gave away the secret of the century, well, personally for her, how the search of her brain ended. So that's where the bijou was buried. Naruto's mouth dropped open in surprise, silently saying, "Oh!" And then she turned white as a sheet. Naruto wasn't stupid. She put all the facts together and was horrified. In such a troubled time, she should have been mercilessly killed. After all, she was a girl with a surprise. No interrogation would clarify her background. The Sharingan was powerless, and so was Yamanaka. Madara's face read spy, with contempt. You can't kill or pardon. Say thank you to Hashirama. Having read the silent question from her face, stemming from the violent reaction, he answered, still showing how dissatisfied he was with her existence and Hashirama's decision. Naruto squeezed out with a heavy sigh. Uzumaki's mother. She raised a hunted gaze to him. It would be too much to hide. Did she put up a barrier for you? Madara wanted to squeeze as much information out of her as possible. But much had already become clear. Her large chakra reserve, which Senju sensed the seal on her consciousness from outside interference. And the bijou of this Hashirama. He sensed good genes. I had no idea about any barrier at all, she said sincerely. She had never had such a thing before. Sasuke had penetrated her subconscious more than once. He wasn't lying. Madara looked at her searchingly, looking for the slightest signs of a lie. But her face, which had amazing facial expressions, didn't lie. Here you go. He threw a suit of armor similar to his at her feet. Naruto stared at it in confusion. Where had he been hiding it all this time? He couldn't hide such equipment behind his back. Stop being a parasite and turning around, went out. Naruto looked appraisingly at the armor. It was red, of course, clan. Taking it in her arms, Naruto immediately let it go. Heavy, damn it, not only was it heavy, but she had no idea how to put it on. Its presence immediately raised a sea of questions. And? Why did they give it to her? They decided to send her on a mission, if you think about the subtext of Madara's last phrase. Kicking him with her foot, Naruto picked up a simple black turtleneck and pants from the floor. She quickly changed and ran after Madara. It would be light. She was a girl after all. And let those brutal men carry their own armor. What? Naruto appeared behind Madara without armor. And immediately Hashirama and Tobirama looked at her with disapproval. The two brothers were standing under the shade of a weeping willow, discussing something between themselves. With Madara's appearance, the conversation was suspended and all attention was turned to them. He will die, and thank the gods. Madara glanced quickly over his shoulder at her. Why should I die? Naruto looked at Madara's back with suspicion. You spar with him, Hashirama smiled brightly. His remark caused confusion on Naruto's face. Why should she spar with a future maniac? Armor won't save you here, she said without any enthusiasm, becoming completely embarrassed. Maybe I'd be better? Tobirama was not thrilled with this idea, sharing her opinion. He suggested that Hashirama check what this girl was capable of himself. But for some reason his brother decided that Tobirama wanted to fight her in order to drive her half to death around the training ground in the name of cold revenge. Like you have personal scores to settle with her, but Madara does not. Hashirama himself, when Tobirama almost asked him to test the girl himself, flatly refused this idea. And you will watch and be inspired, Hashirama said, still smiling broadly. Tobirama frowned in response. Madara definitely won't come, and with him she'll at least have a chance. It seemed like the degree of his suspicion had dropped quite a bit. Will they give you weapons? She asked hopefully, looking at the Senju brothers. Without a weapon, she wouldn't have a chance. And with a weapon, it wouldn't be any better. There's no way to look at the situation here. There's an ambush everywhere. And why all this? She glanced around the Uchiha clan leader's home training ground. We are developing an examination system shinobi, to rank them as correctly as possible. Hashirama beamed like a polished teapot. As if he had come up with it. The author of the idea pursed his lips in displeasure, becoming gloomier than a cloud. She said, finally realizing what was going on here. So I'm a guinea pig. Naruto was embarrassed. And really, I don't feel sorry for her. It's unclear who will die on the training ground in the name of systematizing shinobi ranks Konoha. A noble mission. No, what are you saying? Hashirama immediately waved it off, but stopped shining like a light bulb. He was a lousy liar. No matter how kind he was, the war still left its mark. And he saw it as a useful resource that could be used for the benefit of his brainchild. And how will you decide what rank I will belong to? A dubious undertaking, however. Her whole appearance screamed it. You came up with the ranks, didn't you? She looked at Tobirama. So give him ideas, and then she'll have to take the rap. If you last 10 minutes against me, you'll get the highest score. Madara stops playing the marble statue. What about tactics and strategy? Naruto is trying to get out of this dubious event until they can improve the exam system to what she is used to Chunin. Shikina. Fight against Madara, not an exam at all. With any of these three. Especially her. She is a mystery person here. It is not clear who and it is not clear why she is hanging around here. You'll need them to stand up to me. Madara remained unmoved. There will be no time to think. My chances are obviously bad. I soberly assess my capabilities. Naruto raised her hands up. Here you cannot even enter the battle, to surrender. And then Tobirama chuckles, smiling. Madara grins too. Smugly. And with these grins, the mode is activated to give all the narcissistic cretins around you a hard time, even if you're dozens of times weaker than them. But it's still better not to get involved in a fight you're sure to lose. Oh gods, she has some common sense. I understand, I don't feel sorry for you and all that, but this is, frankly, a bad idea. I told you he'd chicken out, concludes Madara. Hashirama, I told you that you need to choose another candidate for the tester. Anyone can pass in front of Madara. Just like in front of Na, but Tobirama doesn't let Naruto finish. No! She immediately squeals. Give me the weapon. 10 minutes against Madara, and you will take into account everything I tell you later. Naruto holds out his hand. But no one gives her a weapon. Are you afraid that if I get a weapon, I will harm you? She grins cheekily. But apparently, that's not the reason, if you look at Hashirama's slightly guilty face. Hey, then take away all the stabbing and cutting weapons from him. Only Jutsu and Taijutsu. It seems they didn't foresee that she would need it. They were geniuses too. After all, they obviously rummaged through her things and saw a bag with kunai and explosive seals. Here you go. Tobirama unfastens his bag of kunai from his armor, and takes out a short sword from its sheath, and approaching Naruto, hands it all to her. We need to understand how to evaluate and master weapons in combat, and putting all this into her hands, he turns around and goes to Hashirama. Thank you, Naruto puts the short sword aside. She has never used it, and trying to use it could cost her her life, but the kunai, she adjusts the bag with them to her hip, and still hides the wakizashi in the boot. After all, she is used to automatically reaching for the hip bag with weapons. Again, any hesitation is the end of her life. A few seconds often make a big difference on the battlefield. I feel like a suicide, and Naruto takes a decisive step onto the sandy field of the training ground, though with a heavy heart. She is not at the level to stand up to Madara. Her reserves are still being replenished. Kurama is not to be shown at all. With her, only a part of her power and her pathological luck, if she is lucky. Madara grins predatorily and follows her. We won't let him kill you! Hashirama yells at her, seeing her swallow nervously as she looks her opponent in the face. The attempt to encourage her counts, but it wasn't worth relaxing. I hope so, she hisses, her mouth immediately dry from nerves and excitement. Taking out a kunai, she takes a fighting stance. Madara didn't make fun of her. He didn't mock her. He just immediately started to harshly press her, depriving her of an advantage in battle. She forgot to mention the Sharingan. Like there's no point in using the bonuses of her genome, she already has the position of a suicide bomber without his activated red eyes. But Madara brazenly used his entire combat arsenal. Unfair! Her sense of justice screamed indignantly. She had hoped for a fair fight until the end. And this looked little like an attempt to create an examination system. Most likely, like her methodically veiled murder. Madara did not spare her tender feelings and fragile body, and did not make allowances for the fact that she had not yet fully recovered. And they knew this for sure. Tobirama is an excellent censor, and Hashirama is a medic. But the Uchiha did not achieve a swift victory. Naruto made him run. Suffer. And the signature, Kagebushin no Jutsu, completely stunned Madara. And Tobirama was in some kind of ecstasy, or something. Red-eyed, Naruto teased, sensing the Uchiha's confusion. And immediately she felt somehow special, almost omnipotent. Catch me if you can, and stretching her lips in a cheeky grin, she created a dozen clones that scattered in all directions. Sharingan couldn't identify the real Naruto. And all these 10 minutes Madara methodically, with the fury of 10 angry bulls, destroyed her clones, trying to get to her. If Hashirama and Tobirama tell her later that this was not an attempt to kill her, and that they had everything under control, she won't believe it. Her clones died from deadly jutsu, and the rebounds of their torment reached her. Thank goodness that at least a muffled echo hit her nerves, and not pure agony. More than 10 times already she could have really died. With each killed clone, she became more and more convinced that the exam was just an excuse. They were testing her under this pretext, nothing else. A couple of times she tried to get him with Rasengan. Give yourself a head start with the seduction technique. Attack him 10 at a time, using taijutsu to the maximum. It's good that at least she didn't put on armor. Otherwise, she wouldn't have such agility and maneuverability now. In the first minute, she would have already failed. She was lucky, as always. She lasted 10 minutes, however, in the last seconds, apparently sensing that the end was near, she was no longer so agile. And Madara still pinned her down, knocking her down in the sand, putting the blade of his scythe to her throat, wet with sweat, and then Hashirama shouted that the fight was over. The clones, distracting attention, slapped. Madara was in no hurry to remove the blade. Naruto only rolled her eyes and relaxed, however, as much as was possible when you are almost flattened under the mighty, armored body of Madara. Uchiha. You are liars, she croaked. The sounds barely came out of her dry throat, irritated by her ragged breathing. You promised to intervene if he tried to kill me. Look, he killed a dozen clones, the blade still left its post at her throat. Madara collapsed. Well, yeah? Sharingan. Copy ninja. That's it. The technique has spread. Everything was under control, Hashirama said. How could you know it was a clone and not me? Naruto raised herself up on her elbows, looking tiredly towards the Senju brothers. The younger one was enthusiastically writing something in a notebook. She knew that it was impossible to distinguish a clone from the original. And now she was saved from being killed only by the fact that 10 minutes had passed. Out of nowhere, Tobirama declares, earning a look from his brother. You're a traitor! They are like real ones, Madara concludes, already looking at Naruto with interest. That was the plan, Tobirama says, swelling with pride. His brainchild had just been tested in the field. And the results satisfied him to the maximum. Apparently, this cunning woman, having spied on his notes, managed to understand how to use it and mastered the jutsu in a short time. Amazing, Hashirama beamed again like a polished teapot. Apparently, from pride in his brother. Naruto snorts. These grown-up boys almost killed her for the sake of an experiment. Moreover, he can feel his muscles aching from pain. They weren't just testing the examination system here. If you test every shinobi like this, their ranks will thin out, Naruto was outraged. But no one gave a damn about her displeasure. Except Hashirama. He even examined her with medical chakra, and slightly patched up the particularly severe bruises and, as it turned out, a couple of fractures. She got off with a slight fright from the fight with Madara. But this way the weak will be weeded out. Madara kept his appraising gaze on her. It seemed she had amazed him. Not everyone could stand up to him in a 10-minute fight. Naruto had something to be proud of. But she had gained experience for that in the war against him. Too radical, she exclaims. This is stupid. Sparring may show who is stronger, but that is not enough. And what do you suggest? Hashirama intervenes in the conversation, standing between Naruto and Madara. And I propose the following. Now she will show you how it should be done correctly. More precisely, she will tell you. For a mid-ranking ninja, but then suddenly weakness rolls over her, her tongue barely moves, and before she can think of anything, her legs give way and she falls. Unexpectedly, such a necessary and saving rollback from shadow cloning came, not allowing her to tell about the examination system shinobi, to which she was so accustomed. After all, again, this is not her business. Tobirama should introduce this during his reign. Chapter 10. The body ached. Every muscle ached. Every bone. Every joint. Even the hair on her head seemed to be in pain. The trained body bent under Madara's power and turned into jelly, trembling with tension. This is what it meant to fight the head of the Uchiha clan from the time of Konoha's foundation with almost no chakra. In theory, Naruto should be proud of herself and bursting at the seams with joy for herself. Without chakra, 10 minutes against the great and terrible Uchiha is a weighty reason for pride. But what kind of pride is there for a bijou when everything hurts so much? Naruto carefully moved, hissing like a snake, and fidgeted under the blanket, wanting to crawl under it with her head, to hide from the itching feeling that she was being watched too closely. By the way, this feeling forced her to leave the saving sleep, where there was no place for the consequences of an unequal fight. But covering your head with it, a blanket, is not an option. He'll suffocate, or die from the stuffiness and heat. Opening her eyes, she glanced around the room, looking for the source of her intuition's irritation. She didn't have to look for long. The uninvited guest showed up right away. Tobirama was sitting opposite her, writing something in a notebook, periodically glancing in her direction. Apparently, he was looking out for her to wake up. And he finally did. She had a walk-through yard here. Madara would drop in without knocking, and Tobirama would sit there like he was at home. Hey, she was actually a girl. So what if she was a kunoichi? Did that cancel out the norms of decency? Oh yeah. She was suspected of being a spy. They didn't trust her. And they didn't even consider her a human being, since they were throwing her to Madara to be eaten. As soon as she finally woke up, he turned all his attention from the notes to her. Naruto stared at the albino in amazement, unsure how to interpret his presence. Another interrogation with partiality? When would this end? How could she convey to these paranoid men that she did not wish harm to the nascent Konoha? Was this a rollback of technology? He asked coldly. Naruto rolled her eyes. Scientific interest. Not to you. How are you feeling? Nor. That really was a bad idea. No, well, really a lab rat, which is not a pity. It's a shame, though. After using a shadow clone, you feel everything that the clone feels. Tobirama flipped through the notebook and glanced at the notes, then turned his attention back to Naruto. Not really, Naruto only felt tired after the technique. Always. It was a revelation to her when Kakashi-sensei said that the experience gained by the clone is transferred to the original. For her, it was always tiredness, which she always attributed to feeling unwell after the battle. Go pester Madara, I'm tired, and turning her back to him, she wrapped herself in a blanket and stared at the wall, showing with all her appearance that she did not want a one-on-one dialogue with the younger Senju. The pages rustled. If you listened closely, you could hear Tobirama making notes there, moving his pen over the paper. The silence in the room was astonishing. At some point, she suddenly began to be irritated by the even breathing of the younger Senju, who was in no hurry to leave her haven, ignoring her almost direct hints. And her indignation was growing and growing, swelling to the proportions of a biju. Perhaps the younger Senju himself began to irritate her, so she began to get angry. And then bam, an understanding came. He knew. This goat understood that Madara could not distinguish a clone from the original. Just as Tobirama could not distinguish. Unique sensory abilities helped him understand this. And all that time he watched with cold blood as she walked along the edge of the blade, fighting Madara. And he knew about the technique's rollback. He had already studied it on his own, trying it on his own skin. He just collected data from third-party users. You're kidding me. Naruto seethed, turning to him, abruptly sitting up. Her body instantly responded with pain. It was impossible to save face in such a situation, but overcoming the pain, she sat up straight, only slightly grimacing. Naruto extended her hand and pointed to the exit of the room. She would still make Tobirama's work easier here, telling him all the ins and outs of the technique he had invented himself. Senju only frowned at her. You used this technique so skillfully, as if you had been doing it all your life, Tobirama noted, glancing sideways at the notes he had managed to make during the duel with this half Uzumaki. But this strange girl was quite skillful in using it, so he decided to ask her a couple of clarifying questions about the jutsu. Perhaps, if he discussed it with someone who had already used it so successfully, he would be able to describe the functionality and range of application in more detail, excluding hours of his own practice. This woman could say interesting and correct things. True, it was a pity that such things were rare. Usually, she irritated him. For example, now. Uzumaki opened her mouth, about to say something, but Naruto had to cover her mouth with her hand and imitate a throat-tearing cough, preventing himself from answering. After all, the answer was ready to burst from her tongue at any moment. Extremely honest and boundlessly truthful. But Tobirama clearly would not like the information she voiced, as well as the time flow. Or the line. Depending on what time really is. I am a good shinobi, croaked after Naruto's mini-introduction. Senju doesn't need to know that Shadow Clone and Naruto Uzumaki are almost synonymous. This technique is simple, and you saw how functional it is. Sharingan is confusing. I realized that during the fight, she reluctantly justified herself. Apparently, Tobirama would not disappear from her sight until she gave him answers. Very good, Tobirama agreed, getting up from his seat. 10 minutes against Madara with an almost empty reserve says a lot. For example, that she is a potentially dangerous shinobi, with a lot of combat experience. Suspicion towards her never left his mind for a second. Naruto did not take this as a compliment. And it seems she even caught the subtext hidden behind this remark. You can't understand these men. Last 10 minutes in a fight with Madara, and we will give you the highest rank of shinobi. And what in the end? Suspicion increased. Wait a minute, what were they talking about ranks? Senju, pouring a glass of water, approached Naruto and handed it to her, thereby shamelessly confusing her thoughts. Thank you, she took the glass from his hands with surprise. That's how they should have treated her here right away, instead of trying to kill her. Although, their desire to kill was easy to justify. Times are hard. A truce that is slowly strengthening, destroying doubts and mistrust in the minds of Senju and Uchiha. A village that is created on the principle of less death and more life. After all, this is what Madara and Hashirama were guided by. They did not want a war that took hundreds of lives, including the younger generation. Any stranger could interfere with the plans. Surely many did not want the formation of the first hidden village. And she is a stranger who accidentally fell on Tobirama's head. An alien with a surprise in the form of a block on her consciousness. Here, mistrust of her should have reached its peak and led to a death sentence. But miraculously she is still breathing. She needs to moderate her arrogance. Otherwise, she'll come to an agreement and that's it, it's the end for her. She shouldn't forget about that. Madara and Tobirama are paranoid after all. But there was something that was bothering her, and she wanted to find out right now, and Naruto would try to do it politely and carefully, without getting into trouble. She understood Tobirama's hint well. Why didn't you intervene in the fight when Madara, with all his cruelty, began to kill the clones? Neither you nor Hashirama knew who the real me was? He could have killed me. She looked at Tobirama searchingly, waiting for an answer. You had everything under control. She narrowed her eyes suspiciously, trying to catch the Senju brothers in a lie. We had everything under control, Tobirama answered calmly, sitting closer to Naruto. You call this control? Naruto raised her voice in outrage. No, control of emotions, that's not about her. An almost nasty squeal came out, which made Tobirama wince. Of course, it was not her place to voice her complaints, but Naruto could not keep silent. Hashirama asked Madara that if he was going to hurt you, then at least not to aim for vital organs, Senju Jr. answered calmly. Naruto swallowed nervously, pressing her palms to her chest, where her heart was thundering at a furious rhythm. So that's where the dog is buried. Understanding immediately appeared on her face. Hashirama is an excellent medic. There have never been any more like him. Even his granddaughter, Tsunade, could not achieve such skill, being the best medic in the shinobi world. Hashirama could heal a wound of any level, and he would have healed her without difficulty. But he cut Madara to her throat, or thrust the tip of a scythe into her heart, then even Hashirama would be powerless. And Madara could do it with ease. Cruel times. Cold-blooded people. Your technique is as dangerous as it is simple. Naruto took a sip of water and condescended to explain what Tobirama had been yearning for, changing the subject. She eats a lot of chakra. She didn't mention the transfer of the experience gained by the clone. Let him figure it out himself. He's wasting his time, not hers. Naruto wasn't stupid. She understood that Tobirama was trying to make his job easier by asking her about it. He was a busy man. He had little time to thoroughly study the jutsu. but asking those who had tried it in a full-fledged fight was a great option. And what if Senju didn't risk making many clones yet, afraid of depleting his chakra reserves? After all, the jutsu needed to be studied. If it weren't for your reserves, you would have died of exhaustion, Tobirama frowned. And so the minuses began to pour in. And so awesome jutsu. Fools the Sharingan. The moment he realized it, he nearly burst with pride. It was pure pleasure to watch Madara chase a dozen blondes around the training ground. And he sensed great potential in this technique. Yes, Naruto confirmed. At the height of her reserves, she could create an insane amount of clones. About 1,000. And not break a sweat. And now, when her reserves for some reason could not be restored, a couple of dozen. Catastrophically few. So you really are Uzumaki? Tobirama looked at her intently. And he looked so attentively, as if he was seeing her for the first time, and something about her appearance interested him. Half the information she had then passed on to Madara went further. Now she would have to deal with it. If in her time the clan her mother was from had sunk into oblivion, now it was in its prime. And she didn't particularly want to meet its representatives. Tobirama fell silent, still looking at her thoughtfully. Naruto wanted to shrink under his gaze. Well, he wouldn't find Uzumaki in her. He wouldn't. Naruto took after her father. From her mother. A reserve of chakra and potential for Fuinjutsu. And such a frank examination of her person was embarrassing and unnerving. As if she was being examined under a microscope. I wanted to pull the blanket over my head, hiding from the attentive, studying gaze of the albino. You also wanted to say something about exams. I'm ready to listen, after a long pause, Tobirama said, moving on to another sore subject. He still couldn't find the Uzumaki devil in her. Naruto could say the right things. And he wanted to hear her opinion on this matter. The test fights with Madara approved by Hashirama weren't the best option. As a result, they could end up with a bunch of cripples if Madara wasn't restrained. Hashirama and Madara didn't really think through their ideas. But they were burning with them with all their souls. And Tobirama had to bring their absurd ideas to mind alone. And now he had to radically change the system of testing the strength of shinobi through combat, proposed by Madara. The idea was stupid, but Hashirama couldn't be convinced. His brother valued his friend too much, so much so that he wasn't going to listen to Tobirama's cast-iron arguments against this system. In the end, they agreed that they would try it on Naruto before they actually tried it on all the other villagers. After all, Naruto wasn't part of their village yet, so they didn't feel sorry for her. Plus, all three of them were really curious about how skillfully she handled her chakra reserve. Yes. I did. Konoha needs to come up with a more adequate system, not a suicidal sparring match with Madara. Naruto breathed a sigh of relief and grabbed onto this topic like a lifeline. Konoha? Tobirama blinked in surprise. Well, yes. Kanehigakure, Naruto stared at the younger Senju, noticing his reaction. The village hidden in the leaves. The village doesn't have a name yet, Tobirama calmly remarked, quickly overcoming his shock. But now Naruto's eyes widened in fear, as if she had blurted out something unnecessary, something not intended for his ears. If before this everything had been more or less fine, and in Tobirama's presence she did not feel any danger, now his chakra seemed to have gone berserk, dissipating fluids of murderous power. Now he was also looking at her somehow very hostilely. What did she essentially say that was so terrible? Madara. That's what Madara called the village under construction, Naruto found, remembering one of their first conversations. Well, what a beautiful name! With meaning. There is a solid forest all around. The village stands in the shade of the foliage. Very accurately and clearly noted. I think it fits, she rattled on, feeling Tobirama's energy pressing on her consciousness. She was practically bathed in his aura. The younger Senju was furious. Especially after she mentioned Madara. Well, what a great name! Hashirama's ringing voice seemed to fill every corner of the room. As did the optimism that radiated from him, not inferior in strength to Tobirama's not entirely hidden rage. Madara, you are a genius! And Senju Sr. threw his arm over the shoulder of the mentioned comrade, hugged him, shining with all his might, not paying attention to the fact that Madara already wanted to kill. I propose to choose the name of the village by voting, Tobirama hissed. That fucking Madara again. The examination system, now the name of the village. What's next? Madara the ruler of the village? Hashirama will do it. The older brother is sick of paperwork and sitting on his ass in one place. Naruto's skin crawled from the clash of energies between the three of them. What is there to vote for? Great title. Great. Hashirama removed his hand from Madara's shoulder, ignoring his brother's mood. It's decided. He clapped his hands, just like a child who was shown something grandiose, causing admiration. Naruto looked at these three with wide eyes. Hashirama was beaming. Tobirama was angry. Madara was angry too, but Naruto knew that there was joy hidden behind that anger. Naruto understood the Uchiha like no one else. Madara's status did not allow him to show anything positive that could ruin his image of an insensitive and evil shinobi. Tobirama wanted to be indignant, still insisting on a popular vote, but Hashirama continued to broadcast, not letting his brother get a word in. Madara, why were you silent? Poetic and beautiful. Very gracefully and subtly personifies this place. The sun will soon envy the radiance of Senju Sr., and the night itself will certainly envy Madara's gloom. Tobirama was stuck somewhere in the middle of all this. Naruto looked at all this with her mouth open in some kind of bewilderment. Once again, history was being made before her eyes. And somehow it was not magical. It did not touch the soul. It caused only stupor and misunderstanding. A grandiose moment, but there was no smell of grandeur. Somehow stupid and ordinary, and outrageously simple. Naruto, Madara spoke up, looking at her. We decided that you could become part of the village, and Konoha. Hashirama cut in, interrupting Madara's speech. Tobirama barely suppressed the urge to roll his eyes. And you will go on your first mission together with Madara, and the future first handed her a scroll. A scroll that stated that Naruto was now Uzumaki belongs to their yet unnamed village. What? Madara and Naruto said this at the same time. It was unexpected though. I don't think this is a very good idea, Tobirama chimed in. He wasn't thrilled. Naruto nodded her head vigorously, confirming the younger Senju's thoughts. It's worth keeping an eye on her for a while. No! Now Naruto fundamentally disagreed with Tobirama. She was ready to become a shinobi of the newly minted Konoha, but not in a pair with Madara. Going on missions with him. She actually somehow lost the desire to hate this representative of the Uchiha clan, and in her time he was, by the way, a maniac, the likes of which the world had never seen. Not a particularly pleasant guy, but tolerable. If she were to contact him so often, then there was a high probability that she would also develop sympathy for this monster. So Madara will be watching her, and proud of his genius. Hashirama smiled amiably, turned around and walked away, poorly hiding his attempt to escape, every now and then savoring the name of the village on his tongue. Naruto, Madara and Tobirama could only somehow come to terms with the state of affairs. Most likely, to convince Hashirama will impossible.